All right, welcome back to the beautiful city of Charleston. Do you see, let's see, put my finger right on it. Bear with me here a second. Here, we'll do a pen tip, it might work better. Okay, do you see that's when I pull the pen away, watch where we're watching that camera where that is. Okay, see that square right in the center? It's probably hard to pick up on the camera, but you can see with the naked eye. That is Fort Sumter. That is where the first shots of the American Civil War were fired. Good morning, preppers. Welcome back to Prepping with Sarge. I am broadcasting to you from the top of the beautiful city of Charleston. Today, actually, we're going to talk about one of the things that comes up a lot in the prepper community. I see it on Reddit, I see it on the Facebook forums, I see it definitely on YouTube where people say, get out of the city now, you gotta evacuate. It's the most ridiculous thing in the prepping community. Now, I will talk about why it does also have some valid points, but not always. All right, stay with me now. All right, so if you're brand new to the channel, I talk about all things preparedness, homesteading, survival, gardening, food self-sufficiency, you name it. Love to have you subscribe. If you're returning, thank you again. At some point during the video, if you found this to be of any use to you, please give me a thumbs up. Let's get right into it. So first of all, behind me is the Charleston Port Authority. Okay, this is where a lot of our containers come in, and you can see one of the container ships back there. It looks like it's pretty much been offloaded, and the containers come off somewhere over here. Can't really see it too good on the camera. But anyways, Charleston's one of the biggest ports in the East Coast, and this is a very active city. I think we have somewhere over 600,000, and it's one of the fastest growing cities in the world. We gain a net gain of 40 people per day, and that's because it is one of the most beautiful cities in the South. We have beautiful climate, except maybe in August it gets a little too hot in August. A lot of industry here. Our economy is usually doing well, of course, like everybody else, but it's taken a little bit of a hit. So periodically you'll see those thumbnails and titles of like, you have to get out of the city now, or I got a secret letter from a secret agent that wants me to warn my viewers to get out of the city now. All right, so let's talk about this. First of all, you know, if you've been watching my channel, I do not believe that the end is nigh. We're not about to hit the zombie apocalypse. We're not about to have a major collapse like, you know, USSR in Argentina and things like that. Could that happen? Absolutely. Do you want to be in the city if that happens, when that happens? No, you really don't. So I agree with them on that part. The part where I strongly disagree is we still have a long way to go before that happens, and nobody knows really. Like, yeah, the economy's doing pretty bad, and we just came out of the pandemic, and there's all these other things going on. So yeah, it seems like there's signs, but honestly, like, it's still a long, even when things seem bad, there's a long way to go. You have to imagine like what things would have been like during the American Civil War, or you know, the Great Depression, things like that. We're still a long way off from that. And my grandmother grew up in the Civil War. She told me stories, not Civil my grandmother grew up in the Great Depression. I'm sorry, Nana, she's in heaven. She grew up in the Great Depression, told me a lot of stories about that and what that was like. Believe me, we have a long way to go. Times are tough, yeah, but they can get a whole lot worse. So what are some advantages of, now I've lived both in the city like I am now, and I've lived in the country, and there's pros and cons to both. Let's talk about that a little bit. So what are the pros of living in the city? Well, I can tell you, having lived through riots here and multiple hurricanes, the city is always going to have a better first responder response time. So if somebody's breaking into your house or looting in your neighborhood or whatever, you're gonna get a quicker response in the city. That's a fact. When I lived out in the country, when I was in Kentucky, it would take up to like 45 minutes just to get an officer to come out. And that was like when there were bad situations going on and I thought somebody was gonna get hurt. All right, now let me point out a couple things behind me. So right directly over my head is the Charleston Aquarium. If you visit Charleston, please be sure to visit the aquarium. It is awesome. Say hi to Coretta. She is the loggerhead. Loggerhead? Yeah, she's a loggerhead turtle that lives in there. She is awesome. She is a force to be reckoned with. When it's feeding time, she actually pushes the sharks out of the way to get to her food. She's cool, check her out. And then over here somewhere, it's gonna be hard to see because the sun's coming up on that side, is the USS Yorktown. That is a retired US aircraft carrier that saw a lot of battles. And you can tour that. It is really cool. Make sure you do that as well. And also, I pointed out Fort Sumter in the beginning. Definitely check them out as well. what are some of the other advantages of living in the city? Well, I can tell you again from experience from living in both. The city will also get restocked for groceries and gasoline faster than the country, usually. Telephone lines will be restored faster. Fires will be put out quicker. We kind of talked about that. And power will get turned on quicker because they're going to prioritize the emergency services, and getting power turned back on is going to be prioritized to the big hospitals. The idea is you got to save as many lives as possible, right? It's kind of a triage thing. So something else to be thinking about. So if you have any kind of health issues and you need to get to the hospital fast, you're also going to probably want to be, it's another advantage of being in the city. Okay, let's just say it like that. All right, so those are some of the advantages of being in the city. And most disasters, let's be honest, folks. We talk about the zombie apocalypse, we talk about complete economic collapse, and the economic collapse thing surely could happen. There's other bad things that could happen. I mean, there's even the media is talking about that there could be an American Civil War again at some point. I hope not. It would be bloody awful. But, you know, for certain situations, being in the city is good. For certain situations, being in the city is bad. When power goes out and small, short-term things like that, definitely can be advantageous to live in the city. If you're going to live out in the rural areas, you definitely need to make sure you've got what you need to be more self-sufficient. Of course, that's part of being a prepper, right? All right, let's talk about the pros of living out in the country now. I want to move to another spot. Okay, this is kind of cool. If you look right above my finger there, there's a shipping container coming in from the ocean. So just kind of some of the fun things we get to see when we're living here. So I'm gonna flip the camera here. Sorry, I had one more thing I want to throw in there. So for living in the city, one more advantage of living in the city, there is tons and tons of stuff to do. Like, you're never gonna be bored when you live in or near the city. So much recreation available, arts stuff, concerts, movies. Well, there's movies out in the rural areas too. There's always sports. There's always stuff to do when you live in the city. But I did say, let's talk about the pros of living in the country. Now, when I lived out in Kentucky, I did love it, and I miss it a lot sometimes. I really do. There's just something about the quiet living. There is something wonderful about being as independent and self-sufficient as possible. So that is a huge advantage. I mean, there were days where, just to give you an idea of how quiet I'm talking about, there were weekends where no cars went down my street. I had about 7.5 acres in Kentucky. I used about an acre of that for my garden. So I had a full acre of gardening, and then I had like 20 or so fruit trees, had giant compost, so I didn't have to bring in imports. That's another advantage for like you gardeners, food self-sufficiency people. You can really have a lot more. You can have a lot more room in the country, in the rural areas to work with, to not have to bring in compost and things like that, right? And the soil tends to be better, from my experience, if you go out further. Like the soil in the city is bad. It's just polluted. We have tons, because of the water over here, we've got tons of salt and sand that gets into the soil. Even like, I don't live right downtown here, but it blows. Like, the wind will pick it up and it'll blow it towards me. So I constantly have sand issues in my soil. So, you know, there's another one there. Tons of wild animals and wild game. You've got turkey, you've got deer, right? So if you're thinking about proteins, if you've got a pond, you can fill your pond with fish. I mean, you definitely, you know, so you don't have the grocery stores is easily accessible and not quickly as restocked after an emergency, but you have maybe food right in your back door. So that is something to think about. All right, so the last major advantage that I can think of for living in the country in a rural area versus living in a city like this is there's a whole lot less people. And that, you know, if things get really bad, the cities could, let's be honest, the cities could get really bad. Like I said, I was here through the riots a couple years ago, and that's just not likely to happen. Those kind of situations, crime is usually going to be less in the rural areas, but you're trading that off also with a longer police time in most cases. So it's not to say, like, I didn't have issues where when I was out in the country, I did have issues that I had to call the police a few times. Neighbor issues, things like that. People out there that shouldn't be on my property. You know, I don't want to get into all of it, but like, yeah, those issues do go on there. But here in the city, like every week, at least a couple times a week, I can hear gunshots from where I live, right? Seriously, yeah, gunshots. And some of you who live in the city, you're like, oh yeah, me too, no big deal. We hear gunshots all the time, right? So it's reality. So crime is higher in the city in most cases, not always, in most cases. And if people get rowdy, you got a lot more people to deal with, right? So that's an issue to think about. So pros and cons to both. Shorter term situations, you're probably gonna be better off in most cases. If you need the grid restored, if you have health issues, if you need police response, that kind of stuff, you're gonna be better off in the city. Longer term, unrest, grid down for a long term kind of thing, you're probably gonna be better off in the country. A couple last final thoughts about this to think about. If you decide, because there is a huge migration from the city back to the country, and this goes in cycles. Actually, there's some evidence recently, I just read an article about that it's now trending back the other way because people are getting called back into work and being told by a lot of employers that they can't work remotely. A lot of people are moving back to the city, okay? So there's a couple issues to think about. Number one, if you are thinking about moving out of the city into the country, I would encourage you to, some questions to be thinking about is knowing the difference between septic and sewer, right? Because a lot of the rural areas are gonna use septic, and there's some pros and cons to that. You're not gonna have all these monthly fees like I do in the city for my sewerage, but you're also responsible for all the maintenance of that. Most of the time it's not gonna be an issue, but when something goes wrong, it's pretty expensive. Number two, how badly do you need good internet access? If that's important for your work or whatever, then make sure you're checking that out before you buy, because a lot of rural areas still do not have good internet access and some do not have good cell phone coverage. Make sure you know what you're getting into, test that stuff out. Do not, I repeat, do not trust the real estate agent who says, oh, I'm sure it's fine, the previous owner worked from home. No. Make sure you know exactly what you're getting into. How fast is the data downloads and uploads, right? Make sure you know, test your cell phone out there, see what the signal looks like, test it at various spots in that property and outside and around that property, okay? And maybe that's not an issue for you, right? Like there's handheld comms and things like that, walkie-talkies that can resolve family communication issues, but maybe you also need to stay in touch with work and your extended family. Just stuff to think about, okay? Last little bit, whether you live in the city or the country or in the rural countryside, right? I want you to figure out which of your neighbors are gonna be there, which one's got your six, which ones are gonna come in a flank if you're having a problem, right? Start to build those relationships, and then as you build those relationships and you know if there's somebody that can be trusted for if there's a bad situation, then you can kind of increase the communications. People a lot of times ask, how do I start making friends who are also like-minded homesteaders and preppers? Well, you can start with like storm preparedness, right? That's an easy entry point. It's kind of vanilla. So basically, next time you got a storm coming in, just check in with your neighbors like, hey, heard we got a hurricane possibly coming in next week. Y'all good? You need any flashlight batteries? How are you on that stuff? And if they start telling you, oh, no, we got all that stuff covered, that's pretty good indication that maybe they're not a prepper, but they have a preparedness mindset, and you might be able to take the conversation up a little bit. But start slow. You start telling people, hey, I'm worried about, the zombies coming. You potentially are gonna scare off a friend. So you gotta kind of take those conversations step by step, all right? Hey, if this was helpful to you at all, please consider giving me a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, again, please consider subscribing. Also, don't forget to check in the description down below. I throw all kinds of discount codes in there for my viewers, some links to some great products. I hope you check those out. Keep planting your seeds, keep stacking your silver. This is Prepping with Sarge.